Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Wednesday, November the 19th, 2025. Mercury is moving back into Scorpio. So it has been in Sagittarius, it turned retrograde, and now it's returning to Scorpio. And in this video, I want to have a look at Mercury in Scorpio and consider what this might mean and how things might change. And also, I want to look at a few famous people who have Mercury in Scorpio, and this is reflected by the 4 photographs in the thumbnail. But before I look in detail at Mercury in Scorpio, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Wednesday, November the 19th, 2025. So here is the chart for today, set for noon, New York time. And if you look at this chart, you will see that the moon is in Scorpio. There are now quite a lot of planets in Scorpio now that Mercury is back in this sign. So we've got Moon, Venus, or true black moon Lilith, Sun, and now Mercury. And so the thing about the moon in Scorpio, well, moon is now out of a Via Combustor. So, Via Combustor is that part of the sky between 15 Libra and 15 Scorpio. Now that the moon is at 21 Scorpio, you could say that maybe things are settling down a bit at some level. Well, I'm not entirely convinced, because you have to look at the overall picture, but maybe the capacity for things to go unexpectedly pear-shaped has gone. Well, maybe not. But, generally speaking, the last half of Scorpio is, easier than the first half. And so, as far as the moon's aspects are concerned, well, it's making a conjunction to Venus, and that's the main lunar aspect. So, at the beginning of the day, I talked about moon conjunct Venus yesterday, and moon conjunct Venus, is an aspect that is relatively pleasant. It's about being able to get on with people. It's not, though, an especially extroverted aspect, because it is in Scorpio, and Moon and Venus are both in signs where they can be, somewhat, they can brood. I think they can. They don't want to necessarily draw attention to themselves. Nonetheless, it's quite an emotionally orientated aspect, and so feelings in the right environment can perhaps be allowed to flow, but the environment, does have to be right. Now, as far as the new moon is concerned, well, the new moon is tomorrow, and in my video for Thursday, I will be looking at this new moon, but we certainly have a build-up to a new moon. And the thing about the new moon, the moon is waning. So moon in Scorpio, waning. And that's another reason to think that the moon isn't in a great position. It is fallen, and it is the real end of the lunar cycle. So perhaps with a waning moon, it's not an especially good time to be starting new projects, for example. Though I could have said that perhaps with Mercury being retrograde. And also, Mercury is getting very close to the Sun, and that's something I need to talk about probably in tomorrow's video. And so the new moon, we can feel that something is very much coming to an end. And I'll be talking more about that tomorrow. And then we've got Mercury. A lot of emphasis on Mercury today, because Mercury changes sign. Well, if you're in the Americas, Mercury would have changed sign yesterday. I got a post about Chile. The thing about Chile is I underestimated the time zone of Chile. I kind of don't know a great deal about South America. That, in fact, if you were listening from Chile and you heard me say yesterday that Mercury goes into Scorpio late in the evening. Chile is only 3 hours behind Greenwich, so I mean, I don't know why I'm talking about Chile, but yeah, I was surprised it was only 3 hours behind Greenwich. I mean, I think it's normally 4 hours, but Chile has summertime. But so yeah, if you're in Chile, Mercury does go into Scorpio today. But if you're in the United States, for example, Mercury would have gone into Scorpio, last night, and which would have late last night. So it's something perhaps you're already experiencing. But Mercury changing sign. Mercury is about how we think, and often what we say as well. And you would think that Mercury moving into Scorpio means that there is less to say. We don't feel quite so inclined to raise our voice. On the other hand, Mercury is making an opposition to Uranus. It's also making a trine to Neptune. And this Mercury-Uranus opposition is a fairly dynamic aspect. And it is about surprises and perhaps about saying things which could have an impact. And we just say things, we don't really think it through, but once we've opened our mouths, we can see the consequences. And, the consequences are varied. And additionally, with Mercury opposition Uranus, we might be thinking about excitement. There are things to get excited about. We read things, we hear things, and we might sort of immediately want to respond. Though that is one way of looking at it, though Mercury is in a fixed sign and Uranus is also in a fixed sign. So with Mercury opposition Uranus, it can actually make some of us really quite stubborn, particularly if we're talking to another person. Uranus is a very particular planet. It has particular ideas and it doesn't necessarily want to back down. So we might be very into our ideas and feel that we really have to hold fast. And then Mercury is making a trine to Neptune. Well, Mercury trine Neptune, you could say, is a fairly spiritual aspect. It's quite receptive, and we can communicate with things which might be beyond our immediate sphere, and outside forces can communicate with us, perhaps. And with Mercury opposition Uranus and trine Neptune, what's really happening is that Mercury is tuning into a Uranus-Neptune sextile, because that's one of the aspects we've got today. Uranus and Neptune are pretty much exactly sextile one another. I think that the exact sextile is tomorrow, but it's as good as exact right now. And with the Uranus sextile Neptune, it can be about being in touch with outside forces, being surprised. Remember, Ebertin talks about Uranus-Neptune, the elimination of a waking consciousness, something just appearing or us disappearing. We think we're concentrating and then we're not concentrating, and then we're flipped into somewhere else, we're flipped into another dimension. And that might link with Mercury, and Mercury suddenly has realizations, and everything changes. So that's the broad picture in the US, in a chart set for New York. If we set the chart for Sydney, Australia, the moon is still in Scorpio. Moon is at 13 Scorpio at noon in Sydney. So first part of the day in Australia and New Zealand, the moon will be in the Via Combusta. So that might be a time where things may be particularly difficult to predict, and it's going to be important to be flexible. And it can be difficult to be flexible with moon in Scorpio, but a bit of flexibility can go a long way. Additionally, if you're in Australia and New Zealand, that Moon-Venus conjunction is exact at noon or close to noon, maybe in the early afternoon, late morning, early afternoon. So you could say that it's one of the more dominant aspects of the day. And Moon conjunct Venus is, it is a sociable aspect, and the right relationships can work well, especially as that Moon-Venus conjunction is trine the North Node. So if you are in Australasia, possibly a more sociable day than if you're in other parts of the world, particularly in the United States. Perhaps it's just easier to get on with people. But still, there is that Mercury opposition Uranus, affecting all of us, regardless of our time zone. And that's something that you need to bear in mind. And then there is the heliocentric view, putting the sun at the center of the solar system. So here's the chart. So when we're looking at the heliocentric chart, we don't have a sun. We don't have a sun in the chart because the sun is in the middle of the chart. But what we do have is the Earth. And so if we look at the Earth, Earth is conjunct Mercury, Earth is conjunct Uranus. And, well, for one thing, that tells us that we've got a Sun opposition Uranus aspect coming up geocentrically. And, heliocentrically, we've got Earth, Mercury, Uranus all together. So I think that really reinforces the Mercury-Uranus opposition that I was talking about, looking at the geocentric chart. So it could be a day of surprises when there is frenetic activity, certainly mental activity. We are looking for variety, we're looking for action, but perhaps we want it to happen on our terms. So if something happens that we just weren't expecting, how do we respond? And we may respond in a way that is quite willful, and we may not want to look at the whole picture because we're absolutely sure we're right. And that can be a theme of Mercury conjunct Uranus. Yeah, thinking we are right. And so you don't expect things to necessarily, go to plan. But yeah, things can be exciting. And I think that the heliocentric chart does suggest excitement, things happening that we hadn't necessarily planned for. So now I want to turn to the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Wednesday, November the 19th, 2025. Aries. There are at the moment, a lot of planets in Scorpio. I mean, Mercury has just gone back into Scorpio. And this emphasis on Scorpio could be troubling. I mean, not very troubling, but it's a sign that is just at odds with the average Aries. I mean, Aries is a sign that likes to be straightforward, likes to be upfront, doesn't want to be constrained by outside forces, and doesn't really like complications. And when you think about Scorpio, you're thinking maybe about sort of emotional complications, things becoming sort of more difficult than they should be, and just perhaps being impatient with other people's emotionality. But Aries, you are working in the real world, and I think that right now things are just more complicated than you'd like them to be, and you have to be patient with people and resist the temptation to run ahead of everyone. Okay, you can run ahead of everyone provided you do it on your own. If you try to involve other people with what you're doing, there may be resistance, and your actions need to take into account the people around you. And some people are complicated, and this might particularly apply to relationships. Relationships should be simple, but I don't think they will be simple. And if you can then show some sensitivity and just give people time to be themselves, then that shouldn't be so bad. And you just have to resist that temptation to take things too far too quickly. And we shouldn't forget that Mars Mars is in Sagittarius. Mars is now on its own in Sagittarius. Mars used to have company. It used to have Mercury in the same sign as it, but now Mars has got a lot to bear, because Mars, your ruler, is the only planet in fire signs, and so that's you. That's all the stuff you want to do. You want to create action. You want to reach for something new, and suddenly you don't have a great deal of support, which sort of emphasizes what I was saying about you perhaps having to consider doing things on your own. And solitude might then be a theme of the day. Okay, you don't have to be alone, but it just could be that if you want to be effective, the best approach might be to distance yourself from other people and their complications. You can't change anyone. I mean, you might like to change people, but I think it's just going to be really, hard work. And, additionally, Aries, on your own, the question is, what are you doing on your own? Okay, you might have your own personal adventures, but even then, when you're on your own, you may not be able to entirely escape the influence of Scorpio, because, Scorpio, from an Aries perspective, is telling you that you shouldn't necessarily look at things just at face value, just assume that, what you see is what you get. That's not necessarily the case. And, when it comes to, for example, money, if money becomes an issue today for whatever reason, it may become an issue because someone else makes it an issue. It could become an issue because of your own realization. You think about money and you're thinking hard about it, and then you look at something again, and maybe you've made an assumption, and you want to check your assumption, and you check your assumption, and then you found that you've got it wrong. Maybe you've got less money than you think you have. Could be that you've got more money, but there could be a surprise financially if you want to look for that surprise. And of course, you might want to close your eyes and not be bothered by it. But if you are curious and brave, having a look at bank accounts, statements, whatever, there might be something you weren't expecting. And that could be good, could be bad, but I think it's more likely to be something you feel you have to attend to, you have to respond to. And it may well be the last thing you want to do. But if you're able to do that, if you're able to go below the surface, not just with money, but with anything that is administrative, perhaps it relates to agreements. If you just go below the surface, you see things, you have to adjust them. It's not necessarily something you want to do, but you do it and you put the work in. And there is an opportunity here, Aries, to stabilize the situation and eventually to make yourself feel more confident and more comfortable in what you are doing. Taurus. There is a huge emphasis now, or it's a pretty big emphasis in Scorpio, because what has happened is that Mercury was in Sagittarius, and now it's retrograde, and it's gone back into Scorpio, and so now we've got four planets in Scorpio, and so Scorpio is an important sign for the average Taurus. I mean, you could say that Scorpio represents a part of yourself that you don't necessarily always recognize, because as I've suggested, as I do suggest every now and then, that we should see the 12 signs not as 12 signs but 6 polarities, and you are a Taurus, but you might also be a kind of a Taurus Scorpio, and perhaps Scorpio represents the part of yourself that you're not entirely in tune with, that you might be denying. And as a Taurus, you're an earth sign. You like things to be straightforward, and you may not regard yourself as being particularly complicated, and there's just a side to yourself that maybe really is complicated, that is deeply emotional, that's certainly brooding. It could even be a caricature of a Scorpio. And things can become a caricature if they are denied or repressed, if they're sort of working behind the surface. And with 4 planets plus true black moon Lilith in Scorpio, this side of yourself is perhaps becoming more prominent, and you may catch yourself thinking things, feeling things, believing things which are surprising. And what's happening is that you are seeing yourself, and it's good to see yourself, for what you are. And of course, you can see yourself through other people. And with all these planets in Scorpio, your opposite sign, that very often that is about relationships and what people are doing and people demanding attention, and you noticing what people are doing. And if you find yourself being annoyed by another person, particularly if you're really annoyed by another person, then that might be psychologically interesting, because you are seeing traits of yourself that maybe someone else is talking about. I don't know whether you have that, but sometimes you hear someone criticizing another person, and you agree with them, and you nod along with what they're saying. But there's this terrible, uncomfortable feeling when you can actually see your own traits in the person that is being criticized. In fact, the very traits that you are most guilty of are sometimes being criticized. And this might be something that's going on today. You are being shown who you are through the actions and words and behavior of other people. While that is unsettling, you could say that is useful. It's maybe liberating to understand who you are. By the way, I do have Taurus rising. You probably know that already, but so I'm not just talking about you in a sort of abstract way. I can relate to this as well, and I need to be aware that there are all these planets in Scorpio, which is of course Scorpio. If you've got Taurus, if you have Taurus rising, then Scorpio represents your whole sign's 7th house, and inevitably it has something to do with relationships and how you get on with people. And one aspect we have today is Mercury opposition Uranus. Now this aspect does matter, because Mercury is moving into Scorpio for a start in your opposite sign, but Uranus has recently gone back into Taurus. So you've got Mercury opposition Uranus, across the main axis of your chart, and so Uranus is going to be in Taurus for a bit of time. It's going to be in, I think, is it the end of April that Uranus goes into Gemini? So for the next 5 months or something like that, 5-6 months, Uranus is in Taurus. And with Uranus in Taurus, as I think I've already said, this is about you as the individual, you even as the revolutionary wanting to change things. And you can be quite a stubborn revolutionary, believing that your way is the right way. And then Mercury makes an opposition to Uranus. What is that about? Now, that could be about a challenge. Something happening which challenges your individuality. And the question is, how do you respond? And that challenge could be something someone says. I mean, it needn't be involved with other people. It just could be something you notice. And it could make you annoyed. And there is some danger with Mercury opposition Uranus that you double down. You feel that something is so important that you absolutely have to make a fuss about it because your way is the right way, your ideas are right. But that's not necessarily true. And with Mercury opposition Uranus, you should be prepared to be challenged and accept that you may not be right. There is an alternative view. And so I think that Mercury Uranus the Mercury-Uranus opposition can certainly be destructive. It could be. But if you show maturity, I think you can regard this as an opportunity to, understand yourself better. And, finishing with relationships, it is pretty clear with all these planets in Scorpio that relationships can be an important part of your life, and it may be a time to kind of forget your own ideas, or put your own ideas to one side and your own plans, and just see what other people have to say, and give other people a chance. And if you're in a relationship, or you're trying to get in a relationship, you need to give the other person room, and perhaps also accept that in a short term you are working according to their rules. I know you have your own ideas and rules. You're a Taurus, you do, but sometimes you're not as powerful as you'd like to be. And I don't think overall, Taurus, you are especially powerful. Some people may be more powerful than you, and I don't mean that as anything bad. And because of that, you should give them a chance and hear what they have to say. And yeah, it might be a case where, to an extent, you have to follow another person's set of rules. Not something you want to do in a short term, but it might be the right thing to do. Gemini. Mercury is really in focus at the moment. It's doing a lot of things. I mean, for one thing, Mercury is changing sign because it's already retrograde. It's been retrograde for some time. It's moving out of Sagittarius into Scorpio. So that's something going on. And when you got a sign change, Gemini, that can be about the whole way you present yourself changing. Your Mercury was in Sagittarius, and with Mercury in Sagittarius, you perhaps had moments of being optimistic, and you might have got ahead of yourself, and that can happen with Mercury in Sagittarius, because Sagittarius is not the best sign for Mercury to be in. So you might have had big ideas which may not have been realistic, and you move forward with these ideas and you try to move as far as you can, but perhaps you've taken on too much. And now that Mercury is moving back into Scorpio, this might be an opportunity to calm down, to be more reflective. I mean, Mercury is moving into a water sign, and it's a water sign that is quite intense, and so you may be more intense than usual while Mercury is moving through Scorpio, and less willing to be open about your feelings, because when Mercury moves into Scorpio, it makes a conjunction to the Sun, and so Mercury becomes combust. I mean, I'll be talking about that Mercury Sun combustion in greater detail when I do the horoscopes for Thursday, when I do that tomorrow. But it doesn't feel to begin with like a change for the better, Mercury moving out of Sagittarius into Scorpio. I think it is a good thing. I think that there are definite advantages in Mercury moving into Scorpio, but with Mercury conjunct the Sun, you just may not have the objectivity you need. Scorpio is a very subjective sign. It is a water sign. You have your own feelings, and as a Gemini, you might like to think that you're objective, that you're able to look at the facts. Very much so. Of course, like with my political pronouncements, I'm completely objective. That. Or am I? That's the issue with Gemini. Sometimes Geminis are not quite as objective as they think they are, and so when Mercury moves into Scorpio, your your objectivity might well be under question. And so, what do you do? Well, I think one thing you can do when Mercury is moving into Scorpio is, as far as you can, make things straightforward, simplify things. Perhaps you've allowed things to get too complicated. And yeah, you might have got ahead of yourself. And so, Gemini, you arguably have another chance to put things in their place, to get things together. Though at first it might not feel like that, because the moment Mercury moves into Scorpio, it makes an opposition to Uranus. So Mercury opposition Uranus, well, it's an exciting aspect. And with Mercury opposition Uranus, there might just be things you realize. You might come to conclusions which you weren't really ready for, but suddenly something might be obvious, and you'd maybe in the past been in denial, or you just hadn't been bothered to look at something closely. But the moment you look at something closely, it's clear, and it is a surprise. So that's one way in which Mercury opposition Uranus might work, and it could also work at the level of dreams. I mean, dreams are interesting because very often a dream happens, after a period of conscious thought. So we're consciously thinking about something and worrying about something, and we're not sure about what's going on, and we haven't really accepted something, and then we have this dream, and it's all clear, it's obvious. Something happens in a dream where we're just told, and after that, we wake up, it's clear. And does that make things easier? It should make things easier, because we should not be in denial. And whether or not it's a dream, well, don't forget that Mercury is not just making an opposition to Uranus, it's making a trine to Neptune. And so, Mercury is tuning into, this Uranus-Neptune sextile, because there is an exact Uranus-Neptune sextile at the moment. And as I like to say, perhaps too much, is that Uranus-Neptune is the principle of the elimination of a waking consciousness. And that is not what Gemini is supposedly about. Geminis are supposed to be logical, they're supposed to be straightforward. They don't speculate. They don't go flying off into new dimensions or hidden dimensions. But with Uranus sextile Neptune, with Mercury trine Neptune, Mercury opposition Uranus, there just may be moments in the day when you do switch into something else. It may just be for a split second. You are somewhere else. You're in a different dimension, and that's good, provided you're not doing anything dangerous. You don't want to, flip into a new dimension if you're driving at 70 miles an hour down the motorway or the freeway. You don't want that to happen. And so you want to have your insights somewhere where you are relatively protected, and also where you can take advantage of these insights. Sometimes we can have insights, perhaps resulting from flipping into a different dimension for a split second, but then we forget about it and we move on. But you don't move on with this Mercury opposition Neptune Mercury opposition Uranus trine Neptune, because there's something that needs to be held on to. And additionally, Mercury trine Neptune is a very sensitive placement. It may be about your psychic abilities being more fine-tuned than usual, and I would have said that. If you believe you're psychic and you have certain psychic skills, then Uranus and Neptune should intensify them. And I'm not necessarily even talking about anything sort of vague and abstract here. It could be very real, and you may have insights about what needs to be done. Psychic flashes can happen in many different environments. It can even happen in terms of your work or your business. You see something, you become aware of something, and you hadn't been aware of it before, and with this awareness you can start to take action, and not immediate action. with Mercury opposition Uranus, you might be tempted to just act because the Geminis like to respond. They don't like to sit on something that is which is vague or ambiguous. They want to do something about it. But I think Gemini, you need to be more cautious. Just because you realize something doesn't mean that you immediately have to do something about it. Cancer. We are moving into a new moon. So this new moon is tomorrow, but the moon and the sun are already in the same sign. I mean, at noon New York time, sun and the moon are only sort of six degrees apart. So the new moon is very much on us, and this new moon, as far as you're concerned, it could say something about who you are and how you want to express yourself. This is the Scorpio new moon. Generally speaking, you only have one Scorpio new moon a year. Very occasionally you can have two, but certainly not this year. We had the last new moon was at 28 Libra. I think the next new moon is this new moon is going to be at 28 Scorpio. So right at the end, and right at the end of the sign, and it's a time perhaps where things come together, and you might have felt that you're able to be creative, and you're thinking about ways in which you can be creative. You haven't completely understood it. There's still work to be done, but with this new moon, there could be clarity. And if you've been wanting to do something of a creative nature and you hadn't really got it together, you've been always saying, well, tomorrow the time wasn't right. Now with this new moon is just another chance to sort it out. And so if you want to start showing the world what you can do, then now's the time to do it. And it is about feeling good about yourself, feeling that you are doing something that really is useful, is an expression of who you are. And so perhaps the time is soon going to be here, and perhaps you can prepare for this. Although the new moon isn't tomorrow, and there are perhaps other things to be thinking about. Well, there is the moon conjunct Venus, so moon conjunct Venus in Scorpio. I mean, I talked about that yesterday, but the moon conjunct Venus, is still with you, and so your ability to get on with people is pretty good, especially if it's on your terms. I don't think this is a time, Cancer, where you want to compromise or worry too much about what other people are doing, what other people are thinking. You kind of want to do things in your own way, and I don't think that you should feel guilty about that. And if you are open and honest about who you are, then I think that you're going to find that the right people will respond very well to you. So you don't have to worry about leaving anyone behind. At least not leaving anyone behind, but is important. So that does look good. And also, Scorpio, you shouldn't forget that there is still a grand trine. And this grand trine, I talked at some length about this grand trine involving the Sun, Jupiter, and Saturn. It's in water signs, and now the Moon is joining it. The Moon is in Scorpio, Jupiter's in Cancer, Saturn is in Pisces. The Moon is applying to a trine of Jupiter, and that trine to Jupiter could be pretty important, and it could be uplifting. It may help you to realize what you can do, and there's really no need to hold back. I know that Cancer can be a cautious sign. Cancers can worry. They can speculate about, what could go wrong, and for many Cancerians, the safe road is the right road. But that doesn't mean to say that you can't, explore. And yeah, if you make the most of who you are, then you are naturally attracting good luck. And additionally, we have the moon starting to make a conjunction to true black moon Lilith. Yeah, I mean this aspect. I don't think it's a bad thing at all. I mean, true black moon Lilith is currently a trine Jupiter, and so true black moon Lilith is part of the trine, and true black moon Lilith, reminds you that if you want to be genuinely creative, you have to work at all levels. Creativity needs openness, everywhere, because the real roots of creativity, are really deep. They're deep in terms of one's, not just one's emotions, but they are almost at the interface of the collective unconsciousness, where you become part of the collective, and one's dealing with something at a very deep level. And perhaps that's what true black moon Lilith may represent, or partly represent. It can represent your understanding of the depths of the world around you, of your culture, of your society, and just understanding what worries other people, and perhaps also understanding where things are going. But you have to go deep to understand that. And once you go deep, you need to then bring everything together and make it all part of your creative output. So there's nothing trivial about creativity, and creativity, real creativity, is something that in the first instance can be frightening. If it's not frightening, you could argue, where is the power? It sounds rather trivial, because I do think that creativity is a word that is overused. Very often what people claim is creative is just merely derivative and has no personality and no substance to it. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about you really being able to be yourself, and not being afraid. And if you take that approach, and if you are genuine in terms of dealing with yourself, then inevitably that's going to be reflected by how other people treat you, how they behave. And it could be that like attracts like. That if you are honest with yourself, then you're attracting other people who are honest, and those who are shallow, who have their own agendas, they won't be interested. So in a way, it's a good idea to perhaps exaggerate yourself ever so slightly, from at least from a social and relationship perspective, because that's allowing you to understand the social truth. Who do you want to have around you, and who is just going to be a drag on you. They might sort of be so wrapped up in their own world that they can't support you, and they certainly can't foster your creativity. So there might be a natural parting of the waves as far as relationships and your social life is concerned. And if someone is right for you, then the connections will be clear. So in terms of relationships, I think there is room for considerable optimism. Leo, don't forget, Leo, that the sun is soon going to change sign. Sun is now at 27, 28 Scorpio, getting ready to move into Sagittarius. And I think that you're going to probably be quite relieved when Sun moves into Sagittarius. This Scorpio energy has maybe become too much of a good thing. It has, I think, been weighing you down to some extent, and it might have been, or might have been a time when, it could have been quite difficult to really express yourself, in the way you would like, and you felt that things had to be kept hidden, and you were worried maybe. If you reveal too much, what happens. And so now with Sun, with Sun in late Scorpio, you're perhaps thinking about the next stage, and perhaps how you can be more open, and how you don't necessarily have to sort of keep things back. And there may also be challenges, and challenges should be welcomed. And one reason we might have a challenge is because Uranus is Uranus is now in very late Taurus, but Mercury is making an opposition to Uranus. So what's going on is that Mercury is leaving Sagittarius, has left Sagittarius, is moving back into Scorpio. So when it moves back into Scorpio, creating more Scorpio intensity, it makes an opposition to Uranus. And so you might have everything sorted out. You might think you've got everything sorted out. And there is a disruptor. Uranus is a disruptor. Something wanting your attention, even demanding your attention, insisting that you take it seriously. And this is not something that you intrinsically want to do. You'd rather look the other way. But some things can't be ignored. And what Uranus in Taurus is all about, is your direction. It's about your path. You had Uranus going through Taurus for a long time. Then Uranus went into Gemini, and perhaps some of the pressure left. But now Uranus has come back into Taurus. There's unfinished work, and perhaps you'd thought you got it all sorted out. You knew where you were going. Everything was fine, and now Mercury opposition Uranus, you're having second thoughts. You're forced to have it. You're forced to have second thoughts. Now, this might relate to your work, whatever that work might be, or your whole idea about what does it mean to have a status. We've all got a status, all of us. And what is your status? How should this status be changing? And Uranus might represent a demand to reveal yourself, to show the world who you are and what you can do. And again, it's not something you want to do. You want to just keep a low profile. So if that pressure happens, if you do feel that there's absolutely something you need to do, or it's demanded of you, then don't necessarily just look away. Think that it's just something that can be put to one side. I don't think that is the case. And now that Mercury is moving back into Scorpio, we have a conjunction between the Sun and Mercury. So this Sun conjunct Mercury, Mercury is combust, and I think the exact conjunction is tomorrow at the same time as the new moon. And don't forget, there is a new moon coming up. And with Sun conjunct Mercury, of course, when one thinks about a Sun conjunct Mercury, one thinks of Mercury being burnt by the Sun. But of course you are the Sun, because the Sun is your ruler. And so the Sun conjunct Mercury could be about your ideas and what you want to say. And additionally, the Sun, it's not just Mercury, by the way, that's going to an opposition of Uranus. It's the Sun as well. And so in the depths, you might understand things. So if you're trying to separate yourself, if you feel that you are secluded from the rest of the world, that doesn't really isolate you as much as you think, and you have insights. Listen to your insights. Listen to what your mind is telling you. Your mind is telling you things which really are important, and which can be enlightening. And so it's very important right now that you're not too restricted in your outlook, because part of you doesn't want change. Part of you wants just things to just keep going as they always were, and that just can't happen. And now that the sun is getting ready to move into Sagittarius, I think that you will have to, adapt your approach and become more positive, and I think become more outgoing. And I mean, you've just had enough of all this Scorpio stuff. Although tomorrow we have a new moon in Scorpio, and this new moon in Scorpio is likely to have an effect on you, and it might be a moment where there is real clarity, and you might sort of dramatically move from one place to another. But we'll talk about that new moon in tomorrow's video. Virgo. Mercury is your ruler, and Mercury is doing a lot of things. Mercury is changing sign. It's moving out of Sagittarius and into Scorpio. Mercury is still retrograde. Mercury is moving towards a conjunction of the Sun. So it is happening. And you could argue that with what's going on with Mercury, that you do have to be careful. I mean, Mercury moving towards a conjunction of the Sun, it's combust. So there's something weighing in on you. And there may be times, Virgo, where you can't fully make sense of what is happening. You might like to make sense of what is happening. You want answers, you want solutions. But with Mercury moving towards a conjunction of the Sun, it might be that try as hard as you can, you still don't understand it, and there's just something larger than yourself out there. And it may not even be out there. It may be about your own emotions and your own perceptions, and maybe things that you've been keeping hidden, and you just don't know how to respond. But it's not a problem, provided you don't feel that you have to make up your mind about anything. Because if you were to make up your mind today or tomorrow, I'm not convinced that you'd reach the right decision. You might be making up your mind on the basis of false information, or perhaps wishful thinking. You want things to be straightforward. You want a resolution, and so you make a decision, and you make your decision, and you have to live with it. Or you have to embarrass yourself by walking back on it. That's kind of more likely. And so, Virgo, it might be that the best approach is, as far as possible, to see yourself as an observer. You can watch things unfold, and you can watch your own thoughts unfold, because I think your thoughts are going to be quite hectic. You're going to have ideas. You're going to reach conclusions. You'll have opinions, and it's all going to unfold. But you don't have to respond. You can just let the whole thing sort of wash over you. And I do think that's the best way of dealing with ongoing planetary energies, as they say. And two aspects we've got involving Mercury, direct aspects happening today, is an opposition to Uranus and a trine to Neptune. So Mercury opposition Uranus is about a surprise. You seeing things in a new way. You hearing something, maybe you don't like the sound of it. And the reason you don't like the sound of it, because maybe it changes everything. And so, if you've got sort of rigid ideas, those rigid ideas are going to be pressured and challenged, and you have to take into account of new information. And then we've got Mercury making a trine to Neptune. Now this trine to Neptune is kind of linked with the opposition to Uranus, because we've got Uranus is currently sextile Neptune, these heavy transpersonal outer planets are making this aspect. It's all very cosmic, somewhat spiritual. I think it is the cosmos speaking, the cosmos making its opinion clear for those who are able to hear it. And I think you are able to hear it, because Mercury is making an opposition to Uranus, making a trine to Neptune. The information is certainly there, and the change is very there. It's very much there, and this could mean, Virgo, that you might unwillingly be ahead of the crowd, be one of the first people to realize something. You notice that a change is afoot, and sure, you can take advantage of it if you want, but on the other hand, you might decide to ignore it. I wouldn't recommend that course of action. So change should be accepted, and you should listen to the cosmos, because you are possibly one of the first people to hear about the change, to feel that change, to notice things that other people aren't noticing. And with Mercury trine Neptune, this aspect can be quite psychic. I mean, that's a standard way of looking at Mercury trine Neptune. Mercury is the planet of communication. It's in Scorpio, a very sensitive sign. And so if it's trine Neptune, if you feel something about another person, then consider the possibility that you're right. But it's not a certainty. We don't want you to be confused, because, as I've said, be an observer. Just watch those feelings emerge. But those feelings are probably correct. But I say probably. When I say probably, I'm saying 70%. I'm not saying 90%. I'm not saying 100%. They're probably correct. And then, over the next few days, you can sit with these feelings and try to work with them. And no, you don't even have to work with them. You can just need to observe them. But they'll come together at a later stage. And so, do take advantage of any psychic abilities that you have, but don't be overwhelmed by them. That can be a problem with Mercury trine Neptune. It's just too easy to pick up on other people's thoughts and feelings, and where do you stop? And at some stage you've got to just sort through a mass of psychic information and somehow work out where it's all going, and not jump to a conclusion because it seems to be the easy conclusion. So Virgo, it can certainly be an interesting day, but you don't want to be in the center of things, because if you're in the center of things, it just might be just difficult to make sense of anything, and you might get lost. Better to be on the periphery, better to observe. Libra. There is at the moment a lot of planets in Scorpio, because we've just got Mercury moving back out of Sagittarius, and it's gone back into Scorpio. And with this Scorpio emphasis, you might find that money is a continuing issue. I mean, I've been talking about money quite a lot recently, talking about what's going on for you, and the reason I'm talking about money is because in the Libran chart, in the Libran chart, Scorpio can be a financially orientated sign, and the logic for that is, well, Libra is you, what you are, but Scorpio represents, the following sign. It's the resources that you need to support yourself, the resources you need to be a Libran. And when we're talking about resources, we can be talking about money, and it just could be that your mind does keep switching to financial subjects, even if you don't want to. And it just could be that, when you hear something, you're very quick to see it in a financial perspective. You can see the financial implications, and once you see those implications, then you maybe have to take action, though you don't want to brood about it. I mean, that can be a problem. So if for example, you're not happy with your financial situation for whatever reason, I'm not saying it is the case, just if you happen to be unhappy with it, you might just sit with that discomfort rather than thinking about, well, what are you going to do in the real world to change it? And that's something perhaps you have to address. It's not easy for any of us, in a way, to address the real world. Particularly now, there are no planets in Earth signs, and except for Uranus, and that's a transpersonal outer planet, and so there is a certain lack of grounding. And maybe you are aware of this lack of grounding. People can have all sorts of ideas. They can talk about their plans, but what about the money? I mean, how is it going to be afforded? And that might be just something that you are thinking about, especially in the run up to a new moon, because tomorrow we've got a new moon. So this new moon takes place at 28 degrees Scorpio, and for you, that might represent sort of a new financial cycle, if you like, and that might be something you need to prepare for. But I'm not trying to bother you or worry you. I think there are solutions, and I think those solutions will become clear. But you've got to be able to take action, and you've got to be ready to take action, and you've also got to be ready to think deeply. And there are signs that you can think deeply about things and come to solutions. For example, we've got an opposition between Mercury and Uranus. And so Mercury is just entering Scorpio today, or maybe last night if you're in the Americas. And with Mercury entering Scorpio, opposition Uranus, okay, that could be about a realization, perhaps realizing that something of a financial nature is just more complicated than you'd realized. So that could be how it works. And so we have Mercury opposition Uranus, and if you have a realization, that is good. If you can see action, action, is possible, but not necessarily immediate action. You have to give yourself time to work things out. And in general, Libra, you are able to think about things deeply. You might not want to think about things deeply, but you can, and you can reach some very useful insights, and at the same time you're able to be, I would have said, fairly influential. If you want to be an influential, even if you feel completely confused, you can still have an impact. You can get people to listen to you. You might not feel credible. You might think that you don't know what you're talking about, but if you start trying to be persuasive, if you start trying to get someone to believe something, then I think slowly you can make an impact and you can be successful. So if you're in a situation where it appears that no one is listening to you, don't worry. That may just be because you're not trying. And as soon as you start to change someone's mind, then I think you will see results. Scorpio, a lot of stuff in Scorpio, because Mercury has just moved moved into your sign. And so with all these planets in Scorpio, you could say that that gives you a certain amount of strength. You seem to be very, very sure of yourself. You kind of know what you want, and that can be a Scorpio thing. I mean, one keyword that one associates with Scorpio, when one's learning astrology, one learns the keywords. I think that desire can be a keyword that one links with Scorpio. So there could be on your part strong desires, a strong belief that something can be yours, and it can be very single-minded. And Scorpios arguably work best when they're single-minded. You don't want distractions. You just want to be able to just focus on one thing and just see it through to a conclusion. And you're maybe helped by the fact that Mars is in Sagittarius. So that gives a counterpoint to all that Scorpio. So with all those planets in Scorpio, there's a lot of desire, but it just may be too focused. So focused that you can't articulate that desire, and you just sort of you disappear into yourself. But Mars is in Sagittarius, and that gives you a different view. Mars is your ruler. Mars is very active in Sagittarius. Mars is, in fact, the only planet in a fire sign at the moment. Now that Mercury is leaving Sagittarius and going into Scorpio, and so you have the capacity to be open to tell people what you want, and at the same time you have that desire. That belief in yourself, and just a knowledge that it can all work out. And in the process, Scorpio, you can be very disruptive. Mercury, when it goes back into Scorpio, it makes an opposition to Uranus. So Mercury opposition Uranus is quite an interesting aspect. It's very dynamic, and so Mercury in Scorpio is about you being able to communicate what is important to you, even though Mercury is retrograde. It doesn't matter. Mercury is in Scorpio. It's in your sign, and Mercury opposition Uranus. That can be you making an impact, saying something dramatic. But if you don't say something dramatic, well, maybe it's someone else who says something dramatic, or it could be you noticing something. So Uranus is what you notice, and so it could be that someone does something or says something that really surprises you. You weren't really expecting it, and once it's been said, you can't change it. It doesn't. It's not something that can be erased. And so, once that knowledge happens, then you have to work on that knowledge. You almost need to work on it as if it's true, and more so if you hear someone say something. They might say, "Oh, it might just be something they say without really thinking." But it's that old thing, isn't it? In vino veritas. But you don't necessarily have to be drunk to tell the truth. Sometimes when people tell the truth, and they can be stone cold sober, and they might have told the truth accidentally. It might have been their unconscious talking, but once it's been said, it's been said, and that may say something about the way you deal with other people, and other people could be important, but you might also have an awareness here, and we might be thinking about the beginnings of some kind of rift, or not even a rift, maybe just a separation. It's a separation because you understand what someone is and who someone is and what they're like, and there is a feeling today of maybe separation, farewells, departure, and who is doing the departing. And it just could be you doing the departing, and it could be, Scorpio, that you're making the decision maybe to withdraw from something, maybe from a group of people, a society, a scene. It's had its day, and it's had its day, and you have the evidence, perhaps because of what you hear. You listen to what people are saying, and when you listen to what people are saying, increasingly they're telling you the whole story. They're telling you what they are really like. And so, with that awareness, you can make decisions. And it is all about you, with so many planets in Scorpio, and with a new moon in Scorpio coming up. And that new moon at, I think, 28 Scorpio, that new moon really does matter. And for you, it is a new beginning. And in the run up to this new moon, you could argue that it's sort of wrapping things up, things from the past. You understand them, they have their place, and in the process, you might be telling people goodbye. You may not be actually saying those words goodbye, but perhaps privately you know that something's changed, and you're sort of emanating those goodbye vibes, whatever those goodbye vibes are like. And it's a change of scene, and I will be talking in my video for tomorrow. I'll be talking about this new moon in some detail. Sagittarius. Things are changing. Perhaps it might feel that you're losing some of your cutting edge. Reason being that Mercury is now out of Sagittarius, or it's leaving Sagittarius and it's going back into Scorpio. You still got Mars in Sagittarius, but there is a sense in which you may feel that you've lost something, that you're not quite as powerful as you used to be. I think that this view is largely imaginary. It's just a question of a change of emphasis. Things can happen at different levels. Perhaps recently the action was more sort of external. What were you doing as you progressed through the world? What kind of impression were you having? And now that we have got all these planets moving back into Scorpio, or some of them are moving back into Scorpio, some of them are just moving forward through Scorpio, but to be specific, we've got Mercury back in Scorpio. The emphasis is maybe more on what's happening in your private world, your thoughts, your feelings, and just in general looking at things in a different way, and not feeling that you absolutely have to be connected. There is a place for isolation. Okay, maybe not total isolation, but at least for withdrawal. You can't be the center of things all the time, and maybe you should enjoy the opportunity while it lasts, because it's not going to last for much longer. We've got the sun is at 27:37 Scorpio at noon New York time, and it is getting ready to move into Sagittarius. So in 2.5 days, the Sagittarius season will be starting. So maybe over the next couple of days, you can just realign yourself and not feel that you absolutely have to be doing anything. And additionally, Sagittarius, there may be certain things which need to be kept to yourself. You don't have to be open, all the time, and there is such a thing as a secret. If you reveal it now, maybe you were getting ready to reveal something, but if you reveal it now, just the time might not be right. Especially as we've got a new moon coming up. So tomorrow we have a new moon, and this new moon is very close to 0 degrees Sagittarius, but it's not quite there. This new moon happens at sort of 28 degrees Scorpio, and this sort of a new moon may really sort of emphasize to you that certain things do need to be kept to yourself, that you can't be as open as your sign suggests. Sagittarius does have a reputation for being open, not keeping quiet about things. But this new moon in Scorpio is perhaps a reminder that you need to perhaps be more focused and decide what you need as you move forward into the last part of the year, the last less than 6 weeks before we're in 2026. And you need perhaps less rather than more, and that might be something you're thinking about. We always think about what we can gain, what we can add, but maybe you've just taken on too much. And Sagittarius, there may be things and people that you need to distance yourself from. Though, one thing about Mercury, Mercury is, ruler of Gemini, your opposite sign. And so Mercury can often represent another person. And so, with Mercury moving out of Sagittarius, it could be that someone is leaving the scene. And if someone is leaving the scene, you shouldn't make any great effort to get them back. Don't feel that you absolutely have to get through to someone. People are not your own sort of private property. I mean, you know that, but I'm just reminding you of that. But if someone does leave, don't get upset about it. Or if you can't get hold of someone who you thought was important, it could be that they've got their own things to do. And as I think I said yesterday, if someone is leaving and you want them back, then with Mercury retrograde, then there is really a very good chance that they will come back. Capricorn. There is a fair amount going on today, but it involves Mercury. I mean, Mercury is getting a lot of attention. Mercury was in Capricorn, was in Sagittarius, and now it's moving back into Scorpio. So we've got a lot of planets in Scorpio, and Mercury is making an opposition to Uranus. It's making a trine to Neptune, and it's making a conjunction to the Sun as well. And Mercury is the planet of ideas. It can also be the planet of communication. And this might say something about the people around you, what other people are doing, maybe your social life. I don't know how important your social life is to you, but if it is important, then these planets in Scorpio might encourage you to think carefully about who who is around you, and how perhaps you can benefit from them. But there are also costs. Things and people can be too much of a good thing. With Mercury, going back into Scorpio makes an opposition to Uranus, and so this Mercury opposition Uranus, it is the main aspect of the day. And when you think about Mercury opposition Uranus, you might think about a lot being said. People have their views, and they might even have their opinion about you and what you are doing. And I would have said, Capricorn, that's possibly unacceptable. You have made various decisions. You know what matters to you. You know how you are an individual. And so that means that no one should really question it. I mean, certainly not today or tomorrow. You need to be clear about what you're doing and why you're doing it, and you shouldn't even need to explain yourself. So, going back to your social life, it's not at the expense of anything else. I mean, it could be at the expense of something else if you're not careful, because if you give other people too much control, too much power, then you might sort of lose sight of your own, individuality. Now, as far as specific people are concerned, the moon is, making a conjunction to Venus, and the moon is starting to make a trine to Saturn and making a trine to Jupiter. So there is this grand trine that's been forming. Okay, the grand trine was involving the Sun, Jupiter, and Saturn. It's still there, that Sun, Jupiter, Saturn grand trine, but the moon is starting to involve itself in this. And with the moon having made a conjunction to Venus and moving on towards a trine of Jupiter and Saturn, that suggests that certain relationships can really show their worth. So maybe as far as other people are concerned, it's a question of quality, not quantity. It's not about having lots and lots of people around you. It's about instead focusing on the people that are really valuable, who can do you a lot of good. And they can do you a lot of good, if you give them a chance. But if you surround yourself with the wrong people, you waste time on the wrong people, then that would be a shame, because you might be missing an opportunity. And overall, Capricorn, if we look at what's happening today, what this day should be about, what the main theme is about, this grand trine is still very much there, and this grand trine is to a great extent about optimism, you being optimistic about what you can do, and perhaps being optimistic about your own future. And you may see evidence that things can start working in your favor, that things can start coming together, and most importantly, there can be an increasing sense of overall direction, not short-term direction, but we're talking about the larger picture. Aquarius. It seems as we get to the end of Scorpio season that Scorpio just gets stronger and stronger, because Mercury has just gone back into Scorpio. So it was in Sagittarius, but now it's switched signs, retrograded into Scorpio. So we've got a lot of planets in Scorpio. We've got 4 traditional planets in this sign, as well as true black moon Lilith. So it really does concentrate the energies, whatever sign you are. Now, as far as you are concerned, as I've been saying over the last month, I think it really does matter. And we do have to think about what Scorpio is all about for you. And as I've said, Scorpio is about, for you, Aquarius, where you think you might be going, and how you want to sort of proceed on this journey. And perhaps also it might link to the past, because in a way the future is decided in the past. For example, your relationship with your family, maybe decades and decades ago, does to an extent make you the person you are, and also gives you the ambitions, gives you the role models. And in an Aquarius chart, all things being equal, you could say that Scorpio relates to the mother, and Taurus relates to the father. So there may be issues around the mother. It doesn't matter whether your mother's still alive. The mother is one's contact with society normally, and so think about your mother and your mother's role in your life, and what she would want for you, regardless of how good or bad your relationship with her was. I mean, of course, it may be the case that your mother is still very much alive, in which case, it is a time to be really thinking about your relationship with your mother. I mean, so there is a psychological aspect to all these planets in Scorpio, which is not surprising, because Scorpio is quite a psychological sign. On a more mundane level, of course, Scorpio for Aquarians can be a sign which is very career orientated, and with Mercury going back into Scorpio, there may be something of a career nature which you thought you'd got over You thought you decided, you thought you'd made the right decisions, or at least you made a decision. And now with Mercury going retrograde back into Scorpio, you perhaps have to give that decision a second thought, or even a third or a fourth thought. And Mercury, when it moves into Scorpio, does make an opposition to Uranus. In fact, the Sun is making an opposition to Uranus as well. I mean, in a day or two's time, that Sun opposition Uranus, will be exact. Oh yeah, we got a new moon in Scorpio tomorrow. But Uranus is opposing those Scorpio planets, particularly the Sun and Mercury, and this might be disrupting. You feel that you'd got a path for yourself, and suddenly Uranus comes along. Now, that might say something about your family again. It may be about things going on in your home, disruptions at home. I mean, I'm not an Aquarius, but I'm sitting here trying to do my recording, and there is a dog right next to me, and this dog could go berserk at any moment, and I have to stop the recording. But I'm not talking about anything as trivial as that, as far as you're concerned. So they just could be things which are not just annoying, but they mean that you have to really stop what you're doing, or you're pressurized into stopping what you're doing, and perhaps rethink. But I think there's going to be quite a lot of rethinking, and you just don't want to feel that you have to go back to the drawing board. You ideally want to adjust existing decisions, on the basis of the facts as you see them, and perhaps there is new information that really, you need to take on board. But whatever you are doing, it's important that you stay in control. Certain people may feel that they are able to influence you, and there's no harm in being influenced, but you don't want to be influenced in such a way that you lose touch with your whole ambition structure. We absolutely, don't want that to be happening. And as far as relationships are concerned, I mean, relationships, there are pros and cons. There is a degree of pressure to do things other people's way. I mean, some people right now are very insistent, and they're very stubborn, and they want to be paid attention. But there are other people who can be useful. We still have a grand trine in water signs. The Sun is still making a trine to Saturn, and the right relationship can be not just satisfying, but can also be useful. And relationships can exist on many levels, and it could be that you have a chance to really move forward with another person's help. And also we've got this new moon, which may say something about relationships, and someone is requiring attention, but not necessarily in a way which damages your own interests. And as I've been saying to several of the signs, perhaps the key to today, or at least one of the keys to today, is making the right decisions about other people. Certain people really can be helpful, but other people can just waste a lot of your time. Pisces. The water signs are really emphasized at the moment, particularly now. Now we've got Mercury moving back into Scorpio. If you think about the traditional planets, there are now, amazingly, we have got 6 of the traditional planets in water signs. When I say the traditional planets, I mean the planets not counting Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, but the discovered planets. They don't count. So we're talking about Sun through to Saturn. So 6 of the traditional planets are in water signs, which is just a bit too much. It seems really excessive. It's kind of crept up on me. But now that Mercury's gone back into Scorpio, yeah, it's intense. But I don't think that worries you. I mean, you're a Pisces. You are a water sign, and with all of this, watery energy, you could say that things really are starting to move in a way that you can deal with. Yeah, there might be a lot of emotion flying around, but is that of any concern? Well, you're in your element, and so because you're in your element, you can really start to do things your way, and you don't have to compromise. And pretty much wherever you are strong. And there are things that other people might find very confusing, which for you is just completely obvious. And so I'm really quite optimistic about today. But maybe you shouldn't have too many expectations about other people. Maybe it's just because you're on a different level from them. But some people can be rather unimaginative, and they're not really ready to consider the kind of things that you're able to consider, and they might seem slow. And even in a social sense, you try to get some enthusiasm from another person, and it just might be hard work. So as far as is possible, Pisces, do try to do things in your own way. If you get help, that's great. But if you don't get help, if other people seem to be distracted or disinterested, it shouldn't matter. And that is really the best way of handling the day's energies. And on your own, if you happen to be on your own, yeah, I think things really are moving. And tomorrow we've got a new moon. I mean, you can already feel this new moon because the sun and the moon are together in Scorpio, and this new moon is about you being able to perhaps see things in a new way. And your imagination is on great form, and you may start to see possibilities that you'd been kind of aware of in the past, but they hadn't seemed real. But increasingly, these possibilities, they really could happen. And finally, I should point out that Mercury has changed sign. Obviously, I've already said that, but as far as what Mercury changing sign might mean, that may say something about another person, a person in your life, a person who is important. Mercury changes sign, that might indicate that someone experiences a change. They're not quite the person they were. That doesn't mean to say they've weakened, but it could be, for example, that someone who you were used to being quite loud, quite Sagittarian, maybe, even if they weren't a Sagittarius, with Mercury moving into Scorpio, someone becomes more reticent, and maybe that's someone very close to you. It could be a spouse or someone you're in a close relationship with. There is a small change, maybe even a substantial change, and they're not quite as talkative. Maybe they are more reflective. But if they are more reflective, that's fine, because you, Pisces, can be incredibly reflective yourself with all these planets in water signs. So those are my forecasts for the 12 signs, and now it's time to look at the I Ching. So I ask the question, what is Wednesday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 45, which is gathering together, a very sociable hexagram. And this is talking about the people in our lives, and whether or not they are useful. I mean, that's always something to consider. It's all very well being with people, but you have to ask, what is the purpose? And the I Ching is not going to trivialize our social connections. And there is the implication here that we can gather people around us who can do us good, and we can do them good as well. And so as far as is possible today, try to be sociable. I mean, I know that I've said that Mercury is going retrograde. Mercury's going back into Scorpio. We've got a new moon coming up, and there is a sense that today doesn't seem especially sociable from an astrological viewpoint. But then maybe we need to think about the fact that there are a load of planets in Scorpio, and Scorpio is about intensity. You don't just do something for fun, you do something for a reason. So if you are gathering people around you, or you're inclined to gather people around you, think about why you're doing it. And if there is a purpose, then that's a good way to to see things through. And also the question is who is in control, and who is the leader. And I think that we've got the fourth and the fifth lines moving, and particularly with the fifth line moving, that does indicate that leadership, as far as you're concerned, is possible, and you need to hold firm to who you are and what you believe in. It's certainly not the kind of leadership which is about compromise. And if you hold firm to what's important, what you know is right, then in the end, you should find that things really work very well, and you get the support you need, and also you're able to provide that support. But this hexagram gathering together, it does move, because the fourth and the fifth lines change, and it moves to hexagram number 2, which is a receptive. And this hexagram is pure negativity. And I think that this might reflect, in the end, all those planets in water signs. And so that could be that attempts to socialize, which appear to be going quite well, you're with people, but somehow at some stage it kind of breaks down. It doesn't break down in a dramatic way. It breaks down in a way that the sea just undermines the foundations. And we're not talking about anyone's leadership. Yeah, you might have moments of leadership, perhaps at the beginning of the day, but by the end of the day, the receptive is certainly not a hexagram about leadership, not about producing new ideas. It's about reflecting on what is happening. And with six out of seven planets in water, 6 out of 7 traditional planets in water signs, that is incredibly reflective. And we need to observe and feel what is happening around us, and we should not be too concerned about what other people are thinking, what other people are expecting of us, because there's nothing in the end creative that we can produce, and that's not a bad thing. Creativity is effort. Creativity means that we think we're in a position to start something, to initiate something, and we're not, in the end, with the receptive. We're there to just gather information, perhaps gather emotional information. And it also fits with the fact that we've got a new moon tomorrow on Thursday, so this is the very end of a lunar cycle. You could argue that this part of a lunar cycle is the most receptive. The moon is waning, something is over. We're thinking about the past, we're thinking about what has been accomplished, what hasn't been accomplished, and we can just go with it and not feel in the end that we have to do anything. And finally, there is the astrology and the fact that Mercury is moving back into Scorpio. And so let's look at the chart for this. So here is the moment that Mercury moves into Scorpio. So Happens today at 3:20 a.m. London time. So that's why I'm saying that if you're certainly in the United States, then Mercury will have moved into Scorpio on Tuesday, very very late on Tuesday. And so we can see at the moment. This is why this chart shows Mercury at 0 to 0 degrees Sagittarius. In actual fact, that is the moment it moves from Sagittarius to Scorpio. This chart is showing it as being in Sagittarius, but okay, but that doesn't really matter. And we can see what this movement into Scorpio is really all about. And Mercury in Scorpio is opposition Uranus, and I think that colours this sign change so much. Mercury. We think about Mercury in Scorpio as being quite passive and silent. I mean, Scorpio is one of the mute signs. It's a water sign, and Scorpions don't make much noise supposedly. But if Mercury is opposition Uranus, there can be quite a lot of noise. But as I've kind of suggested over the course of this video, maybe we shouldn't make so much noise, especially as Mercury is also trine Neptune. So there's Mercury making the trine to Neptune as it moves back into Scorpio. So it is quite powerful, and tomorrow there's all sorts of stuff going on with Mercury because Mercury is about to be conjunct the Sun. So as far as what we should expect with Mercury in Scorpio, I wonder to what extent we should be looking at the sign. I mean, it's very difficult to look at Mercury in isolation and to say, oh, Mercury in Scorpio, oh, it's going to be silent, it doesn't make so much noise in Scorpio, which is, of course, not true. People with Mercury in Scorpio are capable of being, very loud. And when you're looking at Mercury in Scorpio, well, you should always look at the Sun as well. Where is the Sun? Is Mercury conjunct the Sun, or is Mercury in a different sign from the Sun? So if Mercury is in Scorpio, that means that the Sun is going to be in, well, it could be in Libra. It could be the Sun. If you've got Mercury in Scorpio, the Sun is going to be in Libra, Scorpio, or Sagittarius. So when someone has got the Sun and Mercury in Scorpio, that is a pure Scorpio feel. And arguably, when the Sun and Mercury are in different signs, it is easier because there's some objectivity. Mercury in Scorpio perhaps can be too subjective, and if you've got the Sun in Sagittarius or in Libra, it kind of makes things easier. You can start to see, a different view. But I am concerned about the use of looking at Mercury in Scorpio in isolation. I think it's with Mercury, it's just really difficult to look at signs in isolation. But I think I should try by looking at a few people who have Mercury in Scorpio, and this just might give us some idea about how Mercury in Scorpio works. So, as someone who has been in the news a great deal recently is the mayor-elect of New York, Zohran Mamdani. So Zohran Mamdani has his Mercury definitely in Scorpio, Mercury at 3 degrees Scorpio, on his IC, and it's conjunct Mars. And so when you're looking at Mercury and you're trying to interpret Mercury, there is an argument for saying maybe you shouldn't worry too much about the sign. Maybe you should just be thinking about what it aspects. And Mercury square Saturn, Mercury conjunct Mars. Well, Mercury conjunct Mars may say something about his oratory, his ability to communicate. Even though Mercury is on the IC, but remember, Joe Rogan has Mercury on the IC, and he's able to be a very successful, the super successful podcaster with Mercury in that position. So, that's not necessarily so bad. Mercury being on the IC, and Mercury angular. It doesn't matter, what sign it is. If it's angular, or even it doesn't matter. Maybe even if whether it's a midheaven, the ascendant, the descendant. The point is, when Mercury is angular, it is strengthened, and The question, though, with Zoran Mamdani is, what is he thinking? I think that is the question one should ask. We know that he's talking a lot, he's making promises and so forth, but what's he privately thinking? And that's the key question as far as I'm concerned with Zoran Mamdani, because he has an exact Mars square Saturn in his horoscope, and Mercury is tied in with this square. So with Mercury in Scorpio, there may be things he's thinking, things he's planning, which he's not necessarily being open about. Another person with Mercury in Scorpio is Kamala Harris. So here is Kamala Harris's chart, former presidential candidate, beaten by Trump in the last presidential election. So yes, there's her Mercury at 1 degree 28 Scorpio. And her Mercury, I would have said, doesn't really work too well. I mean, from what we know of her and her ability to communicate. And the question is, why is that the case? It could be that her Mercury is relatively unaspected. Okay, does make a dissociate conjunction with the Sun, so maybe Mercury is sort of off on its own tangent. I mean, it is almost making a trine to Saturn, but it's not making a element to element trine to Saturn. So Mercury in Scorpio trine Saturn in Aquarius. Yeah, that's true, but maybe the dissociate element of those aspects was making a difference, but for her it didn't work. And maybe this is Mercury in Scorpio. Maybe she should perhaps not have said so much. And when she talks, when she communicates, things can go wrong. You might want to look at her midpoints. I mean, for example, her Mercury is on the Venus, Uranus and Venus, Pluto midpoint. I mean, maybe with that Venus, Uranus midpoint, there's something about the way she communicates which is maybe jarring. There's just something a little bit too weird and idiosyncratic about her expressions and the way she puts words together. I mean, I did look at Mercury in some detail in her chart when I was trying to work out whether or not she was going to win the election, and I don't think I want to say much more or any more about Kamala Harris. Now, a future candidate would be Gavin Newsom. So Gavin Newsom has Mercury in Scorpio, and Mercury in Scorpio, yeah, sure, there can be a hidden agenda, but it can also be about, with Mercury in Scorpio and how it communicates. I mean, I don't really know quite how Gavin Newsom communicates, but I'm sure for many people he's an effective communicator, and he's certainly seen as a potential candidate to take on probably Vance at the next election. And so his Mercury in Scorpio might just be about focus. Scorpio is a desire planet, and like Kamala Harris and indeed Zoran Mamdani, he has the Sun in Libra and Mercury in Scorpio. So maybe for politicians, having the Sun in Libra, Mercury in Scorpio is quite a good combination. I mean, if you're going to communicate, if you're going to give speeches, you're going to have to show some passion, and this is what sort of Mamdani has been able to get away with. Maybe it's the same with Gavin Newsom, but maybe the jury is still out on that as far as the aspects Gavin Newsom's Mercury receives. Well, I mean there's a very, very wide sextile with Venus. I mean, so wide as to be fairly meaningless. Plus the moon is sort of sextile Mercury, but those two aspects are just, I think, too wide. So I wouldn't have necessarily read too much into it. You might say, though, that his Mercury is almost on the Moon-Venus midpoint. So the Moon-Venus midpoint, they are 6. Yeah, his Mercury is on the Moon-Venus midpoint. And Moon-Venus as a pair is about charm. It's coming over in a pleasant way, and so that's maybe facilitates the way he communicates. And so it's not the fact that his Mercury is sextile Venus or his Mercury is sextile Moon. Those two sextiles are very, very out in terms of orb, but perhaps they gain their power because of Mercury being on their midpoint. And when you think about Mercury in Scorpio, you do think about things that are hidden, people doing things in ways which are maybe twisted and distorted. And one might also think about serial killers. And one serial killer who has recently been in the news was Bran Koberger, who is serving a life sentence in Idaho for killing 4 students in Moscow, Idaho. And he has his Mercury at 16 Scorpio. And with his Mercury in Scorpio conjunct the North Node, there may be 2 ways of looking at it. From a negative point of view, we think about someone secretly planning this killing and having ideas about it and maybe planning it for years, and we just don't know, and we still don't know. We don't really know about his motives. He was spared the death penalty. He pleaded guilty, but we never really got an exposition of what he was thinking, why he did it, and he wants to keep it secret. Well, I don't know why he wants to keep it secret. Maybe he wants to take it to the grave. Maybe he somehow wants to write a book later on in his prison career, if he is able to last long enough. I mean, it must be tough being in prison for that kind of crime in a high security. Yeah. But somehow you think that Mercury is still sort of working away, trying to think about what it can do and how it can use the information it has. And he was a PhD student, so he wasn't just killing people. He was thinking about the academic side of it, and you could argue that he did quite well in terms of his academic career. He went to college, I think got a master's degree, started doing his PhD, and the academic side probably was the right direction for him because Mercury is conjunct the North Node. So if you've got Mercury conjunct the North Node, mercurial activities are the right way to go. So if he'd stayed with academia, well, he'd still have had to have behaved properly. I mean, apparently his behavior towards female students was inappropriate, and so he couldn't really last as a teaching assistant. But somehow that Mercury conjunct the North Node was a line of progress for him, but other things pulled him away. And while we're on the subject of serial killers, there is Ted Bundy. So Ted Bundy was a Sagittarius, but he did have Mercury in Scorpio. I don't think it's his Mercury in Scorpio is the signature of him being a killer. I mean, I think you'd have to look at other things, but Mercury in Scorpio, like with Brian Koberger, can talk about the secrecy of what he was doing, and of the fact that he was able to live this double life. And unlike Brian Koberger, he was someone who was very charming and charismatic, and he knew how to win people over, and that was part of his technique very often with some of the women he killed. And Mercury in Scorpio therefore is quite good at concealing its motivations. And another criminal, but he's not a serial killer. I mean, Charles Manson, I don't know if Charles Manson ever killed anyone. I mean, not directly. And we would perhaps see his Mercury in Scorpio in a different way. I mean, when you think about Scorpio and what it is about the way the mind is, and Charles Manson was quite vindictive, and if someone crossed him, he didn't forget. And I think that was part of the reason for the killings which involving Sharon Tate. You know, someone owed him money, someone had disrespected him, and you know, so he got his family to go and do his bidding. And you know, likewise with Mercury in Scorpio, it can be charismatic, as we perhaps saw with Ted Bundy, and so he was able to have a powerful influence on his followers. And his Mercury is angular. It may not matter which angle it's on the descendant, it's conjunct Jupiter. So there was something intense about him and about the way he communicated, which some people were prepared to listen to. So Mercury in Scorpio, we've looked at perhaps, you know, the dark side of Mercury in Scorpio, but there are entertainers who have Mercury in Scorpio. And for example, John Lennon had Mercury in Scorpio. I don't think we really have a time of birth for John Lennon, but he had Mercury in Scorpio opposition Jupiter and Saturn. So you could say that with Mercury opposition Jupiter and Saturn, you know, that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, which was taking place in 1940, very much is a collective influence. And John Lennon was really very sensitive to the Jupiter-Saturn cycle. So with Mercury opposition Jupiter-Saturn, some of his ideas maybe were linked to the two chronocrators, the two rulers of time. And you know, we have to remember with John Lennon that, you know, he was born on a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in 1940. He became famous on a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, you know, around the time of 1960, and he was killed at the time of a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in 1980. And so that Mercury certainly plugs him into the Jupiter-Saturn cycle, and in particular the conjunction, and it may say something about how he worked. I mean, Mercury opposition Saturn does indicate the ability to really try hard to structure one's words and one's ideas, and that sort of links with music. And it can be someone who is quite sharp. He certainly was sharp with his words, and that would be you know, Mercury opposition Saturn. And you know, recently I looked at the horoscope of John Cleese, so I'm not going to spend much time on John Cleese, but yeah, John Cleese has Mercury in Scorpio. So this is, you know, showing a side to Mercury in Scorpio, which, you know, which can be creative. And he's got Mercury in Scorpio opposition Uranus, and I would have said Mercury in Scorpio opposition Uranus is potentially very useful if you're a comedian. You want to do things which are dramatic, which are unexpected, and that's what he did. Sinead O'Connor, she died quite recently, so she had Mercury in Scorpio, and she had Mercury conjunct Neptune in Scorpio. Mercury conjunct Neptune, you know, is about how you communicate. It's about how you link to the collective, and it's imaginative, and yeah, it can be very musical and very talented. And so that's one aspect of her Mercury conjunct Neptune. But it is quite intense, and I think that Sinead O'Connor was a very intense person. She had her own sort of psychological problems in issues which she had to sort of work through. And I suppose that was one of the reasons why she was able to be such an effective musician and singer. You have to have something to sing about, and maybe that Mercury in Scorpio, you know, was providing it. Now, when you think about Mercury in Scorpio, you might also think about things that slither. There might be a fascination with things that slither, things, you know, snakes and spiders, and other things which could potentially be quite frightening. But the fascination is there. And someone who had Mercury in Scorpio was a man called Robert Mertens. You've probably not heard of Robert Mertens. And Robert Mertens was a snake expert. So he has his Sun in Sagittarius and his Mercury in Scorpio. He was born in 1894, and during the Second World War, apparently when he was in Germany, and he would ask all these German soldiers in places like North Africa and so forth to bring back specimens. So he was interested in what was going on in other countries, and he put a lot of effort into moving snake collections during the Second World War and moving them to other parts of Germany. So as far as his Mercury and Scorpio conjunct Uranus, that's how it worked for him, being into snakes. And he was bitten by a savanna twig snake, and as a result of this savanna twig snake bite, he died. And he said just before he died that this was, if you're a herpetologist, this is the way to go. And so he kind of accepted his fate. And with that Mercury in Scorpio, Sun in Sagittarius, he was perhaps living out. And someone else who was interested in snakes, who died of a snake bite, was Joseph Slowinski, and he died from a bite from a crate in the Burmese jungle. And so there's his Mercury in Scorpio, conjunct Neptune, conjunct Venus. But I think that Mercury conjunct Neptune is important. So maybe for some people, having Mercury in Scorpio gives one an interest in snakes, but you have, I think, very much got to look at other things going on in the chart. And finally, there is the British King, King Charles. So here's King Charles III's chart, and he has Mercury conjunct the South Node. So we looked at Brian Koberger's chart, who had Mercury conjunct the North Node, but Mercury in Scorpio conjunct the South Node. Well, King Charles is quite a complicated person, and he's clearly someone who is quite an emotional person, who's quite subjective. He definitely has a view. Does he keep quiet about things with his Mercury? No, he doesn't. I mean, he's known for being, throughout his adult life, for really pushing his agenda and writing to cabinet ministers, trying to really interfere with government by making his suggestions. And you could then say that Mercury in Scorpio, there are things that he believes in. But with Mercury conjunct the South Node, maybe he doesn't always express himself in the right way, and so that could be a way in which his Mercury is working. There were other people I was going to look at with Mercury and Scorpio, but I think I've pretty much run out of time. So thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, I would be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.